The first winter I spent patrolling Yellowstone after dark, my supervisor told me something I did not understand until much later. He said, "The rules you are going to follow out there were not written for the visitors. The visitors go home at dusk. The rules are for whatever stays after." I asked him what stayed after. He looked at me the way experienced people look at new ones when they have decided that explaining something is less useful than letting the person find out for themselves. He handed me a laminated card and told me to memorize it before my first solo night patrol. Then he went home. My name is Grant Holloway, and I was 30 years old when I took the night security posting at Yellowstone, which is not the same job as being a park ranger, and which most people who work the daytime operations of the park do not ask about directly. The posting exists. It is staffed year-round. It is listed in the internal personnel directory under a designation that sounds administrative enough that nobody looks at it twice. What it actually involves is patrolling the park's interior roads and thermal areas between the hours of 10 at night and 6 in the morning, alone, in a truck with specific equipment and a specific protocol, and a laminated card of rules that my supervisor handed me on my first day without explanation. I grew up in Wyoming, worked wildland fire for 4 years after college. Spent 2 years doing security work at a research facility in Idaho that had its own set of unusual protocols that I followed without fully understanding. I arrived at Yellowstone thinking I had seen enough strange postings to know how to handle one more. I was wrong about that. But I did not know it yet on the night I drove out of the ranger station parking lot for the first time alone, the laminated card on the passenger seat, the dark road opening up ahead of me into a park that looked, in the sweep of my headlights, completely ordinary. It stopped looking ordinary around month 3, but I am getting ahead of myself. The card had 8 rules. Rule 1. The patrol route is fixed and is not to be altered. If something on the route requires you to stop, address it, and continue. Do not take alternate roads to avoid an area. Do not skip sections. Rule 2. The thermal areas are to be observed from the vehicle only between midnight and 4 in the morning. Do not exit the truck in a thermal area during those hours regardless of what you see. Rule 3. If the radio produces voices that do not correspond to any station personnel, note the time and content in your log and continue your patrol. Do not respond to them. Rule 4. Bison observed on the road during night hours are to be given right of way without exception. Do not use the horn. Do not use high beams. Wait for them to move on their own. Rule 5. If you observe a figure on foot anywhere in the park interior after midnight, do not approach. Log the location and time. Notify the duty supervisor at shift end, not during. Rule 6. The geyser basins will sometimes show activity that is not on the prediction schedule. Log it. Do not photograph it. Continue your route. Rule 7. If your truck stops running for no mechanical reason, stay inside with the doors locked until it starts again. It will start again. Rule 8. At 4 in the morning, pull over at the designated waypoint on the eastern road, turn off your headlights, and wait 5 minutes before continuing. Do not look at the tree line during those 5 minutes. 8 rules. I read them twice in the parking lot before my first solo night. Then I put the card on the passenger seat where I could see it and drove into the dark. The first 3 months were quiet in the way that most things are quiet before they stop being quiet. I drove my route. I logged my observations. The radio occasionally produced sounds that I could almost but not quite resolve into voices, and I noted the time and continued as instructed. The thermal areas steamed and glowed faintly in my headlights the way they always do, and nothing in them moved in any way that required explanation. The bison were real and constant and enormous in the dark, materializing out of the blackness at the edge of my headlights with the particular indifference of animals that have never had a reason to be afraid of anything. I gave them right of way without exception. I did not use the horn. I waited, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes longer, for them to decide the road was no longer interesting. I want to tell you about the bison before I get to the harder things, because the bison taught me something that the other rules built on later. Waiting for something large and indifferent to move on its own schedule without trying to hurry it, without asserting yourself into a situation that was going to resolve itself in its own time regardless of your impatience, that is a particular kind of discipline. It sounds simple. It is not simple at 2 in the morning in -20 temperatures with 3 hours of patrol still ahead of you. But you learn it. You sit with the engine running and the heater going and the enormous dark shapes of the animals moving slowly through your headlight beams, and you learn that your schedule is not the relevant schedule out here. Something else sets the pace. You are just moving through it. That understanding, I think, is what the bison rule was actually teaching. Everything else that came later made more sense because of it. The first rule I had to work hard to follow was Rule 5. It was a Tuesday in late November, my 3rd month, temperature around -15, the park interior empty and white and lit by a half moon that turned the snow blue. I was running the northern loop of my route, the section that passes through the Lamar Valley, when my headlights caught a figure standing at the side of the road approximately 200 meters ahead, standing still, facing the road, watching my headlights approach. Every instinct I had said to stop. A person standing alone in the Lamar Valley at 2 in the morning in 15 below temperatures is a person in serious danger. Everything about my training before this job said stop and help. The rule said not to approach. Log the location and time. Notify at shift end. I drove past at normal speed. I did not turn my head as I passed. I logged the location with one hand while driving with the other. In my peripheral vision as I went by, the figure did not move, did not turn to watch me pass, did not signal or call out, just stood there, facing the road, still as the snow around it. I called it in at shift end the way the rule required. My duty supervisor at the time was a woman named Akaffer who had been running the night division for longer than anyone else currently on staff. She listened to my description and asked 2 questions. What was it wearing? I said I could not determine. Was it still there when you passed? I said yes, as far as I could tell. She said, good, you followed the rule. She made a note and moved on to the next item in the debrief. I asked her afterward, in the break room, what the figures were. She poured her coffee and did not look at me right away. She said the park had a long history, and that some of that history had left marks on the landscape, the way history sometimes does in places where significant things happened over long periods of time. She said the night division had been logging figures for as long as the night division had existed, and that in all those years of logging and not approaching, nothing had ever escalated beyond what I had experienced. I asked what happened the one time someone had approached. She looked at me then. She said there was no one time. She said the rule existed specifically to make sure there was no one time. She said that was the entire purpose of the rule, and that understanding the purpose was more useful than asking about exceptions. Then she finished her coffee and left, and I sat in the break room for a while thinking about what she had not said, which was considerable. I saw figures 11 times in my first year. Always after midnight, always still, always facing the road as I approached, never moving as I passed. I logged all 11. I notified at shift end each time. I did not approach any of them. In my second year I saw figures 7 times. In my third year 4 times. I do not know if the reduction means anything. I have not found a pattern in the locations or the seasons or any other variable I have tracked. They appear when they appear. I log them and continue. The radio voices tested me in a different way. The almost voices, the static that shaped itself briefly into something resembling speech, I had logged and moved past from the beginning without much difficulty. They were unsettling in the way that any ambiguous sound is unsettling in the dark, but they were ambiguous. My mind reaching for pattern in noise, I could rationalize them. What started in my 5th month was harder to rationalize. I was driving the southern loop at around 2 in the morning when the radio produced a voice that said my name, not my title, not a call sign, not a generic address. My name, Grant, said once clearly in a register that sat somewhere between male and female in a way that was difficult to process in the moment and remained difficult to process in the weeks that followed. Then static, then silence. I noted the time. I noted the content. I did not respond. It happened 4 more times over the following 3 weeks, always between 1 and 3 in the morning, always on the southern loop. Always my name once and then static. I told Akaffer. She asked whether the voice had said anything beyond my name. I said no. She said that was consistent with prior logs and asked me to note the specific locations each time it occurred, which I began doing. When I plotted those locations on my patrol map, they clustered near a specific section of the southern loop, a stretch of road that ran close to one of the smaller thermal pools, a pool that was not on any public tour map, set about 50 meters off the road behind a stand of lodgepole pine. I asked Akaffer about that pool specifically. She told me it had a designation in the internal geology files, but no common name. She told me it had been active longer than the monitoring records went back, and that it was one of several features in the park that the Geology Division described in their internal documentation as not fully consistent with known hydrothermal mechanics. I asked her what not fully consistent meant in practical terms. She said it meant the pool behaved in ways that the models did not predict, and that the Geology Division had been noting this for decades without producing an explanation that satisfied their own standards. She said Yellowstone had a number of features like this, and that the park's public materials did not reflect the full complexity of what the Geology Division actually observed on a regular basis. I asked if the radio voices and the pool were connected. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said that in her 11 years running the night division she had learned to be very careful about the word connected, because in a place like Yellowstone, where everything was geologically and thermally and historically interrelated in ways that science was still working to understand, The word connected could mean almost anything, and therefore sometimes meant almost nothing useful. Then she said, but the voices cluster near that pool in every log I have ever reviewed, every single one going back to before I took this posting. She said it like it was a data point, like it was simply a thing that was true. The voices said my name 41 times in my first year by my count, and then stopped completely in my second year without any change in my behavior or my route or any discernible reason. I drove past that pool every night of my second year, and the radio was silent the whole time. I do not know why they stopped. I do not know why they started. I logged them when they came, and I continued my patrol, and when they stopped I continued my patrol, and eventually I understood that not knowing was simply part of the job, the same way not knowing why the figures appeared and then did not appear was part of the job. You observe, you log, you continue. The truck rule, Rule 7, I only needed once. My 9th month, June, the park green and alive in a way that made the darkness feel different from winter, warmer and somehow less empty. I was on the middle section of the route, between the Geyser Basin and the Hayden Valley when the truck engine stopped. No warning light, no mechanical sound preceding it. The engine simply stopped running while I was doing 40 miles an hour on an interior park road in the dark. I coasted to a stop, turned the key. Nothing, not the grinding of a failed start, not the click of a dead battery, nothing, like the truck had simply decided it was done. I sat there with the windows up and the doors locked in the dark pressing in on all sides, and I thought about Rule 7. It will start again, not it might start again, not try these things first, it will start again. I sat for 22 minutes by my watch. I did not get out of the truck, I did not call anyone. I did not try the engine after the first attempt because the rule did not say try periodically. It said stay inside with the doors locked until it starts again. At 22 minutes the engine started, not when I turned the key. It just started the way it had stopped, without input from me, the dashboard lights coming back on, the heater resuming, everything picking up exactly where it had left off as though a pause button had been pressed and then released. I sat there for another full minute before I put the truck in gear. I have never tried to explain what stopped that engine. I logged the time the truck stopped and the time it restarted in the location, and I submitted the log at shift end. Akafer noted it and asked if I had followed the rule. I said yes. She said good and moved on. I did not ask her what had stopped it. By that point in my posting, I had learned that certain questions were not going to produce answers worth having, and that the better use of the energy was staying focused on the things the rules gave me some ability to manage. The rule about 4 in the morning took the longest to understand fully. For the first several months I followed it mechanically, the way you follow any instruction whose purpose is not immediately clear. Pull over at the eastern waypoint, turn off headlights, wait 5 minutes, do not look at the tree line, restart and continue. It felt like a ritual without explanation, the kind of instruction that earns your obedience through the general credibility of the card it sits on rather than through any understanding of what it is for. Then one morning in February, my 7th month, I was parked at the waypoint with my headlights off, 2 minutes into the 5-minute wait when every animal in the area went silent at the same moment. Not gradually, not the spreading quiet of a predator moving through a landscape. All at once, the total and complete cessation of every ambient sound in the Lamar Valley, the wind. The distant creek sounds, the small movements of nocturnal animals in the snow, all of it ending simultaneously as though something had pressed its hand over the mouth of the entire valley. The silence lasted 3 minutes. Then at 4:05, exactly when the rules said to turn my headlights back on and continue, the valley resumed. First the wind, then the creek, then the small sounds returning one by one until the night sounded like a night again. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and my headlights on, and I did not move for almost a full minute after the sounds came back. I have been parked at that waypoint at 4 in the morning more times than I can accurately count now. The silence comes roughly one morning in 3. It begins at 4:01 at the earliest and always ends at 4:05. It does not correlate with weather or season or temperature or any variable I have identified in 3 years of logging it. When it comes, I sit with my headlights off and my eyes forward, and I wait for it to end. I have never looked at the tree line during those 5 minutes. I want to be honest with you about that, because honesty is the point of writing this down. There have been mornings when not looking was one of the harder things I have done in this job. When the silence was complete and the dark outside the truck was total, and something in the quality of the air, some pressure or presence that I have never found adequate words for, made the tree line feel like the most important thing in the world to look at. I have never looked. Akafer retired at the end of my 2nd year. Her last night she sat in the break room after shift and drank her coffee and talked to me for longer than she had ever talked during a normal debrief. She told me she had followed all 8 rules for 11 years without breaking any of them. She said it was the thing she was most professionally proud of in her entire career. Not the incidents she had handled or the efficiency of the division or any of the things that appeared in her personnel file, just the 11 years of followed rules. I asked her if she had ever come close to breaking one. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said there had been a morning in her 3rd year, at the eastern waypoint, during one of the silent 4 o'clock waits, when she had been so close to looking at the tree line that she had physically turned her body away from the driver's side window and stared at the passenger side instead for the remaining minutes. I asked her what she thought was at the tree line. She stood up and rinsed her cup in the sink. She said she did not know, and that not knowing was the only reason she had been able to get in the truck and drive back out there the next night and the night after that and all the nights that followed. She said the moment you decide you know what is out there is the moment you start thinking the rules might not apply to your specific situation. She said that was the most dangerous moment in this job, more dangerous than the figures or the voices or the silent valleys or the trucks that stopped without reason. The moment you think you understand it well enough to make your own decisions about it. She said good night and walked out to her car and drove away, and I have not spoken to her since. I am still on the posting, 3 years in. I drive the fixed route. I give the bison right of way. I log the figures and the voices and the unscheduled geyser activity. I stay in the truck when it stops for no reason, and I wait for it to start again. And every 3rd morning or so at 4 o'clock, I pull over at the eastern waypoint and turn off my headlights and sit in the silence that falls over the valley all at once, and I stare straight ahead through my windshield at the empty road, and I wait for 4:05. I do not look at the tree line. I will not look at the tree line, not because I am not curious. I am deeply, persistently, profoundly curious about what is there, but because Akaffer was right, the rules were not written to explain what the park is after dark. They were written to make sure the people who work in it after dark come back out of it in the morning. And 3 years in, I am still coming out every morning. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point.